Very nice to see you here, and I would like to give you a very warm welcome to come to this afternoon's seminars. And today we are very honored to have two distinguished visitors. First is David Harrit from the Manchester Metropolitan University in the United Kingdom. The second is Professor Marley Wood from National Cultural Normal University. So let's give them a very warm welcome. And I would like to give you a very warm welcome to you as well to come to this afternoon's talk. And as we know that the global warming is now a very important issue, and everyone is discussing about the impact of global warming on the society and the ecology. And most of you are working on the atmospheric science. And today we are very happy to see the economists and people, artists, to join us in these discussions. So this is truly an interdisciplinary discussions, and it is also a very rare chance for every one of us to have this discussion. So please enjoy today's discussion and have more questions during the presentations. So I would like to first invite Marley to give us a more introduction to the David. So let's welcome Marley.
谢谢王老师，然后谢谢各位同学的参与。终于讲中文是不是？好，我大概简单的介绍一下，就是说这一次我们邀请 David Haley 来台湾的一个想法哈。好，谢谢。那主要是那个我在这几年因为都在做一些跟生态艺术有关的东西，所以我前2年到英国展览的时候就认识了 David Haley 然后我了解到说他也一直都在做有关生态艺术方面的活动。那另外就是他最近跟美国的艺术家就是 Newton and Harrison 他们也曾经到中央大学来那他们一起在合作的一个计划叫做温室英国的计划。那等一下 David 他会跟大家讲说他们在这个温室英国的计划里面做了一些什么事情。那我也因为刚好这一学期我们学校有一个卓越教学计划，所以我就特别邀请他们来台湾，想说我们如何有可能够在台湾里做一个温室台湾的计划这样子。那也因为这样的一个机缘，所以我就帮忙他们安排，把他们现在正在英国做的这个温室英国的计划，就邀请到高雄的美术馆要做展览。那这个展览预计是在今年的9月所以到时候那个 Harrison 夫妇2个人就会到台湾来。那在这个之前呢，我就先邀请 David Haley 来带我们的学生，就在高师大的学生，还有就是其他学校的学生，就一起做了一个创作营，就叫做如果高雄紫色一座寿山岛。那其实我们也在讲那个全球软化的一个议题。那待会我的部分我会介绍一下我们最近这个工作坊所在做的事情。那所以我想就是我们邀请 David Haley 来，其实一个很重要的一个意义是在于说，因为 David 本身是一个艺术家，那对于我们来说，通常一个艺术家他很会自己创作，可是呢，如果我们要跟科学领域的人或者是其他领域的人一起工作的时候，这方面我们的经验又比较少那因为我们的研究所是叫跨领域艺术研究所，所以我们也是接着说邀请 David Haley 来台湾，一方面带领我们说到底我们如何进行一个跨领域的合作，那另外一方面也是针对气候变迁，到底我们可以做些什么事情那我想接着他的演讲，还有我后续的一些补充说明，可能也可以帮大家一起想象说，如果未来我们艺术家们希望跟贵所或者是贵校合作的话，我们是不是也可以一起推动一些什么样的计划？这样好，谢谢。
Okay, so let's welcome David.
Fine. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay, this is something you're familiar with, I hope. I must apologize first. I do not speak Chinese. Okay? If there is anything you do not understand, please ask me straight away, okay? I will try and speak as clearly as I possibly can. But part of my art is playing with language. So sometimes the terminology I use might be different. So as I say, if there is anything you do not understand, please ask me, okay? I am an ecological artist, okay? You may not have met an ecological artist before. Professor Wang has met 2 other ecological artists, okay? And Professor Marley mentioned Helen May Harrison and Newton Harrison. We call them Harrisons. Okay? But today, I'm going to talk very briefly about some of my projects. Some of them relate to global warming, climate change. I hope all of them include creativity. And something I'm very interested in is futures thinking, particularly critical futures thinking. But first, 2 definitions. Okay. Ecology, most of you are probably familiar with. I use the Oxford English Dictionary definition, which is the relationship between organisms and the relationship those organisms have with their environment. Okay? And my art is about the relationships. Now the other definition I use as a definition for my art. And this word, earth, comes from the Rig Vedas. Okay? The earliest writings of human beings. And the word earth is still used in modern day Hindi in India. Yes? And this word means the dynamic process by which the whole cosmos continues to be created virtuously. So in this one word, we have an aesthetic or a beauty that most people understand as art, but we also have evolution that most scientists are familiar with. And we have the idea of virtue or a moral obligation. Okay, so it's a very complex word, and it means a lot more than maybe a lot of art does today. But I shall take you very quickly through some of my projects, some of which have taken place in Manchester, some in other parts of the UK. One of them looks at the UK relationship with the Atlantic Ocean. And finally, I look at a project that I work with the Harrisons for the whole of the island, the mainland of the UK, or Great Britain. First of all, as an ecological artist, I'm very, very interested in watersheds. Do you understand watersheds? Do you use that term in Taiwan? Yeah. Okay. Some people call them river basins. So, yes. So in 2000, 2001, there were many big floods in the UK, and Shrewsbury Museum and Art Gallery, which is a town on the River Severn, which is the longest river in the UK. They invited me to come and work with the town, with the people, to work with the Environment Agency, and to work with the town council to see how the people might live with their river and global warming in the future. And I've been regularly working with them since 2001 now. So I asked some questions. A lot of my art is based on questions, and a lot of my teaching at my university with my students, we ask questions all the time. Much of our society is based on problem-based learning. But my course, we look specifically at question-based learning. Often with problems, we close problems down. In the world that we live. But questions open things up so that we can look at things in a different way. And I think this is partly the job of an artist in society, to look at things in a different way. And this is hopefully how scientists and artists can work together. So, I asked, given the accelerating effects of climate change, how may my art contribute to a new culture in which the problems give way to our capabilities, our skills, and our questions? Perhaps the most important question there is the second one, because I was working with a community of people that I had not met before. So what right did I have to work with them, to tell them how to live with their river? And I realized through asking this question, how might I and those I love survive the accelerating effects of climate change? So the thing I had in common with those people in Shrewsbury is climate change and how we might survive. If you develop that question further, you have to ask, who do I love? Well, I have my wife back here, Yvonne. I love her. I love my daughter. I love my family, my relatives. But how far does this love go? Do I have to love all my neighbours and all the people in the town where I live, and the cats and the dogs and the spiders? I don't know. But this is one of the big questions we have to face when we think about climate change and how we will survive climate change peacefully or not, as the case may be. And then a very specific question about Shrewsbury. What is the flood remediation aesthetic, and how is it arrived at, and how appropriate is it? When I went to Shrewsbury, they gave me their planning document, which was this thick, and I read right way through it. And I noticed, although it was written in engineering language, most of the criteria they had to make the choices were based on aesthetics. How to maintain the views of this beautiful river, how not to create a bad big wall, how were they going to make sure that tourists would still enjoy the town with the new flood defences in place. So I also thought that this gave me permission as an artist to take part in their flood control designing. So this is the River Severn in Shrewsbury. This is the English Bridge. You might think this is an idyllic English view. And Shrewsbury is a medieval town. Okay? And it was designed to use this loop in the river. There is a castle that was to defend England from the Welsh. So you have the castle, you have a town, a walled town, and here you have, next to the river, you have meadows. Okay? Which is very useful, very rich grasslands to feed animals and also to provide grain for people to eat. When the river flooded, of course it got free fertilizer. Okay? So it's a very good place to live. In the 18th century, there were people wrote about the town and said, down here, people had so much salmon they just got fed up with this fish. Yeah? So it was a good place to live. However, now the town has grown and grown, and it now builds on the floodplains. See, here are the meadows. So now when the when the river floods, it floods people's houses. And this is very bad news for people. So they don't know how to control the river. They try to build walls around the river, but the river comes underneath or around. So they build more walls, and this just makes it worse flooding further downstream. Here you are, where it's flooded a whole car park. So I looked at different issues. I talked to a lot of people, interviewed people, and I used this image, in fact, for the poster for the exhibition I made, which is to show the world upside down and my reflections on it. I created, I don't know what the lighting is like. It's okay, don't worry. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
This was a sculptural installation, and there were 5 doors. Each door I wrote a poem, and the poetry was based on my dialogue with local people. The whole exhibition was called River Life 3000, a dialogue for the beginning of time. So my dialogue was with the people of the town and with the river. The 3000, River Life 3000, referred to the fact that the local newspapers called the floods of 2000, 2001, the Great Millennium Floods. Now, the Environment Agency that I was working with, they changed, or wanted to change, the ratio for the number of times the river flooded from 1 in 50 years to 1 in 100 years. But the report I read, I noticed excluded a lot of information from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So they had not factored in climate change issues. So I asked the question, if they were going to change the flooding scenario from 1 in 50 years to 1 in 100 years, what would a flood of 1 in 1,000 years be like? Now, the Environment Agency refused to work with me, first of all. It took me 3 months to have a meeting with them. And finally, the City Council made the Environment Agency representatives meet me. And we met in this room, and the body language was like this. And we sat down, and they said, "How did you know?" I said, "Sorry, how do I know what?" And they said, "Where did you find out?" I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And they said, "The 1 in 1,000 year scenario. How did you find out about our plans?" Ah. I said, I explained, as I just explained to you, how I came to this title of 3000, River Life 3000. Industrial spy. Because they were working on a 1 in 1,000 year scenario with one of the largest insurance companies in the UK, called Norwich Union. And they were worried that I would release this information before then, because this would affect house prices for a very large area of the UK. Okay? So sometimes scientists and artists get the same information, but from very different ways, very different understandings. I just mentioned briefly back to this. This is based on a design for the first kind of water clock, a clepsydra. And this design I took from an ancient Egyptian design. Now, clepsydra was the first time for human beings to have a regular hour. Okay? The ancient Egyptians had 24 hours in the day, same as us, but they had 12 hours nighttime, 12 hours daytime. So depending on the time of the year, in winter, hours were very short. Hours were very long. 12 hours was a very long time. And the daytime hours were very short. The opposite in summer. But they then worked out, by using water to flow from this shape, like a bucket, that you could have a regular hour. Okay? So the idea here was to show the flow of water as it drops into this font. And there was a microphone underneath the font that every drip that came into here, you can just see a drip here, okay, was amplified. And every drip had a unique sound, a unique pitch. I didn't realise until I'd actually installed this in the gallery. To help me make this, you notice that the shape is like this, the sides. The ancient Egyptians made like this. First of all, they made it straight. and they couldn't work out because they did not know about water pressure. So they did not know why the flow of water changed as water came down. But they did know how to compensate for it because they had the geometry and the mathematics. And I worked with Professor Keith Bevan of the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology at the University of Lancaster. He gave me the mathematics to be able to make this. And I worked with a glass artist from the University of Wolverhampton. So already there's 3-4 universities involved just in making this. Okay. And this was in one room in the gallery. In the next room in the gallery, there were exhibitions by the Environment Agency, the City Council, and community groups. So I invited them in to work with me so that my art and their art came together. Now, the car park I showed just now, which was flooded, was here. Okay? And the town council got money from the central government to then build these flood defences. But I was interested over the next summer that, these flood defences, this is the river, these flood defences were being built here. But I wondered why there was this big crane to build these. I then found out that they were building the new town hall, actually on the floodplain, and they were using the new flood defences simply to defend the new town hall. A crazy world. But this exhibition, the poetry from it was curated by people in the United States for an exhibition called Ecovention, which took place at Cincinnati. The work and my presentations about that project, I was invited to go to Kyoto in 2003 for the 3rd World Water Forum to give 2 presentations there. From the exhibition, we also got money from the English Arts Council to work with 10 artists looking at climate change, culture change in the city of Shrewsbury and the region. We developed a schools program as well. One of the main features of this schools program was for the children to ask about their futures. What might their futures be? Not just one future, but many, many, many futures, diverse futures. And the interesting thing for me was that program was very difficult for the teachers because they had not taught anything about the future. They taught history, they taught English language, they taught sciences, they taught the arts, but always about history, not about the future. So the teachers were very frightened of the future as well, and they did not know how to talk to the children about the future without scaring them too much. So we had to do a whole program of workshops with the teachers so the teachers could teach the children to think about the future. I also created, this is a postcard, and it's a lot of English towns have postcards with different views on. You have them here, tourist postcards. And wish you were here. It's a kind of English joke about tourist things. Okay? But on the back of the postcard, I invited people to give stories about the river and ideas about the future of the river. Because everyone I spoke to said what they need to do with the river is this. Everybody had an idea, but the authorities were not asking the local people who actually live with the river what their opinions might be. So I used this postcard, which was promoted by the BBC radio and by local newspapers. So people would come to the museum, they would be given a postcard, they could write their opinion, and then the postcard went into the museum archive. So it was a way also of the museum expanding its collection through a living archive. Okay, I'm going to speed up now on different things. This is Helen and Newton, Harrison, and in 2005 I was invited to go back to Shrewsbury to put together a symposium called Evolving the Future. And in 2005, people were still unsure about climate change. It seems crazy now. But I put together this symposium with the idea that climate change was definite and that it was a given fact that global warming and climate change were taking place. I had 20 scientists, eco-activists, economists, and artists. And I invited my two friends, the Harrisons, to be the main speakers for this. And from that, we then put together, I invited them, in fact, to look at a work that would include the whole mainland of the UK. And so we worked on the idea of global warming and its effect on our main island. So I will go through very quickly just my other projects and then come back. So one project that I'm working on right now is Rivers from the Future. Go quickly through this. And it looks at the source of rivers. Okay. The parts of rivers that don't even have names. Parts of rivers that only appear when it rains. Okay. But without these, there is no river. And our highlands, we have down the centre of England called the Pennines, which are small mountains compared with Taiwan. But this is the main source of our water. Some of it's very beautiful, very high biodiversity. And it produces our greatest resource of all, fresh water. One of the things I tell my students now is forget gold, forget silver, forget diamonds, forget oil. Water, fresh water, is our greatest resource on the planet. And in the UK, we actually have now problems with our fresh water. Parts of the UK has a lot of fresh water. Other parts are actually turning to desert. This is the UK. So I asked the question, given this amazing resource that we have, why are we building the new suburbia all over it? Okay. Are you familiar with the word suburbia? Yes? So the Alps? The suburbs, yes. So this is where most people in the UK live. Okay? It's not in the city centres. It's actually apologies. Sorry about that. Okay. That was a surprise. Okay, most people live in suburbia, which is outside of the cities, and it takes up a lot of good land, destroys biodiversity, destroys the water. This is one of my main projects. Another one is a drop in the ocean, trace of life. And again, this looks at the relationship between waters. And it asks, what might happen if we take one bacteria out of the River Mersey, which is a big river in the north of England. We take one bacterium, we put a phosphorus trace on it, put it back in the river, and we see the journey of this one bacterium as it flows down the River Mersey to Liverpool, where it flows into the Irish Sea, where it flows into the Atlantic North Drift, to go past Greenland, to then turn into a cloud and float down the United States, to then rain on the Chattahoochee Mountains, and it rains on the mountains and into the Chattahoochee River, past Atlanta, into the Gulf of Mexico, where it comes round on the Gulf Stream, evaporates up into clouds again, floats across Ireland, and rains on the Pennine Mountains, and flows back into the River Mersey, where it started. Okay. So, part of this project was me writing to, you notice, Coca-Cola, to see if they would be interested in supporting my project. They wrote me back a very polite letter saying they were very sorry they could not support my project because all the water in the Chattahoochee River downstream of the world's biggest bottling plant has no bacteria in it. Made my point. So the bacterium acts as a storyteller about the state of waters throughout the Atlantic. I'll go very quickly through these. Okay. Walk on the Wild Side. This takes place 10 walks that I have made in Manchester that looks at Manchester, the city, as a living organism itself, and looks at the city and its place in the watershed. So rather than thinking of the city as being a place, we actually look at the place and then look at how the city works within the ecology. what I was interested in was the way that nature, biodiversity, finds its way back. However much concrete, bricks and buildings we produce, grasses, trees, insects, birds, small mammals make their way back into the city. And also with climate change, this is a big hotel, also with climate change, I was interested in the migration of species from southeast England, where the temperature is already 1 degree hotter than it was 15 years ago. So there's a lot of species moving out of the southeast, and they're moving northwest. Manchester is in the northwest. But what happens when they meet a big city development? Some birds cannot fly over it or around it. Some trees, some plants have difficulty. So what I wanted to do was use the walks with different people from the community. And these are students, these are community leaders, these are scientists, these are museum people. Lots of different people come on these walks. And we look at where wildlife has come back into the city and the different species that are still growing in the city itself. It also helps people think about planning and how planners put cities together. And so it looks at the democracy behind spatial planning and asks many questions about how planning takes place. This was one of the walks with a school party. So these are 15-year-old pupils from a local school who, in fact, what they were looking at here, this walk took place in early February. So it's in the middle of winter. They were looking at frog spawn. Okay. Masses and masses of frog spawn. Very, very early in the year. Okay. Normally, you wouldn't get frog spawn here until maybe late March, April. So it's like a month, maybe a month and a half early. I was also interested in observation and reflection. Again, I mentioned before, I work with the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology at Lancaster University. And I'm now a friend with the head of land use in this institute. And he was talking about the problem he had with his scientists who came into work every day, switched on their computers. 5 o'clock, they switched off their computers and went home. So they lost the ability to do field studies. Okay? So they had remote sensors that would give them the information. The problem is that all this remote equipment and electronic data gathering systems had been installed 10 years ago. It's been designed 15 years ago. So this data gathering equipment was answering the questions from 15 years ago. Now we all know, in terms of our knowledge of climate change, how dramatically new information has come in, even in the past 2 years. So a lot of the work that they're doing is actually working with equipment that's very much out of date. But worse than that is the loss of the ability to ask new questions. So part of the thing of my walks through the city was for people to use their senses again, so that we can actually hear the birds, we can actually see the changes that take place. We can smell the phosphates coming off the earth. And we can touch the earth, touch the trees. So we can use our senses again to ask new questions. Here's some more people making drawings and studying the place. Needless to say, a lot of these walks take place along rivers and canals. So water is very important. Some of these canals now go under the city. Going through quickly now. I'm trying to. People again looking at changing tree cover with climate change, how things are coming in much earlier now. We're looking at abandoned bridge here, which has got a lot of, well, almost going into tree succession. And this is a biodiversity corridor, which foxes use, birds, and all sorts of wildlife in the middle of this big city complex. Running out of battery. Really. It's okay, I've got it here. Okay, so this is like a lot of tree cover on this bridge. And I write some poetry to go with it. Oh. Okay, yeah. Right. So, back to the Harrisons. Back to my work with them. I worked with them, started to work with them in 1997 on a project called Casting a Green Net. Can it be we are seeing a dragon? And what we looked at was this area across the north of England. Here you have the Pennines. These are the mountains I mentioned. Here you have Liverpool and the Irish Sea. On this side you have Hull and the North Sea. Okay. Over here there is France and Holland and Belgium and Germany. So what we were interested in was grinding, bringing together the Mersey water basin, which is the Mersey River here, and this whole water basin, and the River Humber, and this whole water basin, either side of the Pennines. And we did a series of very large maps, the size of this whole wall. And we coloured in with colour pencils. Okay? A lot of students helped to work on this. It took a long time colouring in. And so each of these maps becomes a painting or an icon, and it tells a story visually and then also with poetry. This one was called Sunlight on the Dragon, and it looked, there were tiny little drawings all over this of different types of biodiversity. This one is the eco-urban edge. And it looks at what would happen if all the cities remain separate rather than planning according to the economic market, which connects cities. So we're looking at separating cities and putting around them an eco-urban edge to keep the cities separate so that culture remains separate, but also maintains biodiversity as much as possible. This one we call the Great Green Farm. It looks at the different kinds of farming that can take place right across this part of England. This one then looks at what happens according to the market economy when all the cities start joining up. I can't remember what this one was. But one of the things we found out in the research was that this part here was the region we were looking at. And it was called European Region E20. And it was part of a trade route that went from the west coast of Ireland, across the UK, across the North Sea, into parts of Holland and France and Germany, and actually through the Baltic states to St. Petersburg. And it was a trade agreement between the United States and the European Union to stop former Soviet countries trading with each other again. So when I was talking earlier about people's knowledge of spatial planning, the general public did not know about this region at all. So they did not know the significance of so much development taking place in this part of the north of England. So this project, our project, worked with this information so that people had a greater understanding. So that was 1997, and I worked with Harrison's as project manager and chief researcher. Well, I mentioned earlier that 2005, I created this symposium called Evolving the Future, and I invited the Harrisons back. And I said, okay, our first project looked at the north of England, but wouldn't it be a very good idea if we worked together again and looked at the whole of England and Wales and Scotland, mainland Britain, as being one ecological, geophysical domain, one artwork for the whole of mainland Britain. So we created Harrison Studio, Britain, and I was the associate artist to Helen and Newton. We had a project manager who raised some funding for us, and then the Harrison's son, Gabriel, actually designed the exhibition with us. So the start of Greenhouse Britain was to get some maps and to use these maps as a sketch. Now these maps, again, were 3 meters high. And we started to look at 5 meters increments, what happens as sea level rises. And we got information from the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change, based at the University of Southampton, who are part of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So we're working very much with scientists like yourselves to get very accurate information. And so we were able to work out how many people have to move from their houses at 5 meters. how many square kilometres of land are lost. Then at 10 metres, we get to 5 million people being displaced. Then at 15 metres, we get to nearly 8 million people. Because, similar to Taiwan, most of our population is around the edge. This is London, Manchester and Liverpool in here. We've got Hull, Leeds, and other places just up here. So big populations have to move, even though not a lot of the land is lost. Okay? These are the Pennine Mountains here. So, I'll show you some of the exhibition now. The exhibition has been travelling up the UK at 6 venues. In fact, this is my university. This is my art school, where I work. So the exhibition that we use has got a large model with an audio-visual rig of lights and sound above. It takes several days to put this in place in the gallery. So as you enter the gallery, you get this image, which I believe is called an azimuthal projection. And it places Great Britain at the centre of a world. Not the world, but a world. And it's the centre of our attention. This is the first thing in the project when we asked the question, students that I was working with in Kaohsiung will know this, how big is here? Okay. So for this project, how big is here is the whole of mainland Britain. In fact, this is at a different venue, but this is then the model. And the audio-visual projection changes to show sea level rise and what happens and what gets lost. A lot of people, when they come into this exhibition, actually look for their town, so that they're actually able to see whether their town is affected or not. We then tell different stories about different things that will take place as sea level rises. One story that we tell is about the Lee Valley, the Lee River Valley. And the Lee River Valley here that flows into the River Thames. This is London. And we started by showing planning that is currently taking place, where the new housing is being built in the floodplain. There are 4 million new homes being built in the floodplain, which is crazy. Okay? In 50 years, this will all be underwater. So we show this planning back to front, okay? Wrong way round. We then show the right way round, the ideas and the visions that we suggest. Now, the ideas that we show are not the only ideas. As I mentioned earlier, we talk about many futures, not just the one. So the idea of this exhibition is to enter dialogue with people, everybody, from all disciplines, to ask the question, how many different ways can we think of surviving into the future? How many different ways can we design the future? So here we have the idea of new kinds of planning coming in. sorry, here we have the idea of new planning coming in. Now this is the whole of the watershed for the Lee Valley River. And what we look at is reforesting. Now a lot of this is farmland, this side, and a lot of this is urban development on this side. But we now we ask the question, wouldn't it be good if more water is generated here? How might we do this? And the way of doing it is to look at new foresting to produce new water. Currently, right now, this river produces 10% of the water used by London. And by increasing the foresting, we think that as demand goes up, we can actually maintain that 10%, at least for another 50, maybe 100 years. So we also looked at new kinds of building, new places to live. Now, this created quite a lot of controversy when we put this in the exhibition, because as ecological artists, people expect us to be building log cabins and having grass roofs, rather than these kind of futuristic science fiction kind of structures. But what we were interested in was to make as little impact on the earth as possible. So these structures, each of which would carry maybe 20,000 people, actually are on stilts that only touch the earth a little. So we can increase all this foresting. People can live here. We can get power from photovoltaic cells. We can reuse water systems within here so that we create very little impact on water. And we can start to even grow things, have hanging gardens within these structures. And whole communities can live here. This might not be the sort of place that you want to live, but it might be the sort of place that we have to live in the future. But this was just one idea, working with a company of architects to design this new kind of housing. Okay.
It's newspaper, Chinese newspaper. It's about an architect who designed the whole.
Ah, there you go. Yes, it's popular. Also, architects love this sort of thing. Okay, so it takes into consideration movements of the sun, and how to make better use of all building facilities. We also looked at the Pennines as an area, because as the sea level rises, people have to move somewhere. So they will move, we think, to the high ground. We looked at a place just south of Pennines. We got this one area on the map as being an ideal place. First of all, to develop meadowlands, then to develop forests, and a new kind of farm that's called open canopy foresting. Okay, so we can start to use the fruits of trees, use nuts rather than growing large fields of grain. This is much better in terms of low carbon use, and in fact we start to use carbon. Okay? So not just carbon neutral, but carbon negative. We looked at 25 square miles as being an area. And we looked at the watersheds. We looked at the shape of meadows and how these would become forested. And together with this open canopy forest, we reduce half the amount of carbon that people produce. So each of these maps tells a different story. And then we also looked at a different kind of housing. I mentioned earlier my project, Rivers from the Future, where the rivers start on the high ground. And so if we have to build houses there, we now look at houses that are on these stilts. So low impact on the earth. And then we fill in fact, underneath with rocks. So it creates more habitat for biodiversity, and it filters the water and allows the water to run naturally into the aquifers under the ground. So it's a low impact in terms of water. And in fact, we then created many of these similar places as a design concept around the Pennines, to therefore protect the waters of the Pennines. One of the things that, again, I mentioned in the workshop in Kaohsiung, as artists working in this way, we have to be very careful that we get all the right information. And so all the information that we use is given to us by the scientists we work with. And that is the end of this presentation, because hopefully Greenhouse Britain will be coming to Kaohsiung in September. And the idea is that this will then start a dialogue for Greenhouse Taiwan. And Professor Marley and I have been working on this idea now for nearly 2 years. And the workshop that we did last week in Kaohsiung brought together eminent professors and some wonderful students to start thinking about Taiwan in this way, and what will happen as sea level rises. Okay, so thank you very much for listening. And I'd now like to pass to Professor Wu Madi.